The dying Baron rang the bell one last time. The sound cut through the air of Thornhill Plantation like a knife. Sharp, metallic, and familiar enough to make stomachs twist in the slave quarters and in the big house alike. For 20 years, that bell had meant humiliation, punishment, or worse. Tonight, everyone knew it meant something different. It meant the monster upstairs was running out of time. In the cotton fields, the September heat clung to the earth like a damp, suffocating blanket. Cicadas shrieked in the trees, and somewhere far off, a dog whined under the weight of a coming storm. Along the dirt path that wound from the quarters up to the big house, a 17-year-old girl walked barefoot, each step quiet but certain. Her name was Cleo. Her feet knew this path better than they knew freedom. Stones, roots, ruts, she could walk it blind. Generations had worn that trail into the ground, marching up to the mansion when summoned, sometimes returning broken, sometimes not returning at all. But tonight, the path felt different under her skin. Not softer, not kinder, just final. From his horse at the edge of the field, Overseer Harlow watched her with dull, bloodshot eyes. Years of cruelty had hollowed him out, leaving only a man-shaped shell filled with whiskey and habit. "Move faster, girl," he muttered, not even bothering to bark it the way he used to. His voice held no real urgency. Even he knew the Baron's demands were almost over. Cleo didn't answer, didn't flinch. Her face stayed exactly the way she had trained it to be since childhood. Blank, neutral, the kind of expression that said, "I feel nothing," even when everything inside was burning. But behind that practiced mask, her mind was moving fast. 3 months of planning, 11 years of reading papers she was never supposed to touch, a lifetime of listening and remembering. Everything had led to this slow walk up to the big house, to the man dying inside it, to the legacy he thought he'd leave behind. And tonight, she was going to set it all on fire without lifting a single weapon. As the mansion rose in front of her, it glowed pale under the sinking sun, its white columns and wide porches gleaming like bone. People sometimes called it beautiful. From a distance, it looked like success. But Cleo knew what it really was. A monument made of stolen lives. Every brick, every polished plank, every chandelier had been bought with human misery. Inside that house, Baron Thornhill lay in his grandest bedroom, his lungs rattling like loose nails in a box. The doctor had given him 3 days, at most. His 2 sons, Frederick and Thomas, had already started shouting about land and money. Their arguments drifted out of open windows, riding the humid air like ghosts. You'd think a man facing death would be thinking about his soul. The Baron was thinking about one last display of power. Before Cleo reached the front steps, the kitchen door opened and an older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Mama rose, skin dark as turned soil, back a little bent, gray hair wrapped in a faded scarf. But her eyes were sharp as ever. She had been the one to hold Cleo when her mother died in childbirth. The one who taught her letters in secret. The one who'd whispered stories about rebellion, escape, and a different kind of life when the overseers weren't listening. Now, those same hands that had once rocked her as a baby gripped her shoulders, fingers trembling. "Child," Mama Rose whispered, voice rough with fear. "You don't have to do this. We can run tonight. I got supplies hidden, got people on that railroad who owe me favors. We can be halfway to freedom by morning." Cleo looked her in the eyes. For a heartbeat, she let her mask slip just enough for Mama Rose to see the truth, the fear, the anger, the steel. "No," Cleo said quietly. "Running means he wins. Running means he gets to die thinking he broke us. I won't give him that." Mama Rose swallowed. "He's a powerful man, even dying." "He's a dying man," Cleo corrected gently. "Power is slipping through his fingers, and he knows it. That's why he rang that bell." She took a breath. "And he doesn't know what I know." She reached into her dress, fingertips brushing the worn leather satchel hidden beneath the fabric. 3 months earlier, while dusting the Baron's study, she'd found the first crack in his empire. A drawer left slightly ajar, a corner of paper sticking out. She'd opened it with hands that didn't shake because she'd been training for this moment her whole life. Birth certificates, sale records, letters, numbers, names, and then a document that nearly stopped her heart, her mother's freedom papers, signed by Baron Thornhill's own hand, 20 years ago. A promise made after she nursed him through a fever that almost killed him. He had promised her freedom and then locked that promise away, hidden with old ledgers and correspondence. Lily had died still in chains, never knowing that on paper she had already been free. Mama Rose had cried when Cleo showed her. Cleo hadn't. She had burned the tears out of herself years before. If Lily had been a free woman, Cleo had been born free too, which meant every moment she had spent on this plantation as property wasn't just immoral, it was illegal by the very laws the Baron claimed to follow. And he hadn't just done it to them. Those papers were surrounded by other secrets. Forged bills of sale, missing signatures, quiet deals done in the dark. Cleo didn't need a gun. She had something better. Proof. Listen to me, Mama Rose said, voice shaking. You go up there. You play this wrong. He might still sell you. Maybe he can't walk, but he got sons. He got friends. Men like that don't die alone. They take lives with them. Cleo gave a small, humorless smile. That's why I didn't come alone. As if on cue, another figure appeared in the shadow of the hallway. Minerva, a house servant, cheeks pale, hands wringing the edge of her apron. He's asking for you, Minerva said, barely above a whisper. Says it has to be tonight. His sons are drunk in the parlor, hollering about who gets the riverland. Doctor's gone. Only old Nurse Pritchard up there. And she can't hear a thunderstorm unless it hits her chair. Cleo's pulse quickened, but in the way a blade sharpens, not in fear. Perfect, she murmured. Everything just how we need it. She kissed Mama Rose's cheek, a quick brush of lips, then stepped past her and into the house. The air inside was cooler but heavier, thick with the smell of polish, linen, and fading life. She passed portraits of men in tailored coats and women in silk dresses, all of them staring down with the same entitled emptiness. The Thornhill line, painted in oils, preserved on canvas. She wondered what they'd think if they knew a girl from the quarters was about to erase their legacy with ink. Cleo climbed the curved staircase, one hand trailing the polished wooden rail. Candles flickered in golden sconces, throwing long shadows that wavered over the walls like ghosts trying to cling to their home. At the top of the stairs, the door to the Baron's room stood open. She could hear his breathing before she could see him, ragged, wet, arrhythmic. The slow rattle of a man whose body was surrendering. Inside, Nurse Pritchard sat slumped in a chair by the window, chin tucked toward her chest, snoring softly. Baron Thornhill lay propped up on a mountain of pillows, skin sallow, lips cracked, hair thin and plastered to his scalp with sweat. The cruel spark in his yellowed eyes was weaker now, but it was still there. Cruelty doesn't die quickly. It hangs on as long as it can. When he saw Cleo in the doorway, something like satisfaction twisted his mouth. "Come here, girl," he rasped, voice catching on phlegm. "Closer." Cleo stepped forward, hands folded neatly in front of her, posture small, deferential. To anyone looking, she was just another terrified young soul dragged into the orbit of a powerful man. But if you had looked closely, you would have seen it. The calculation in her eyes, the quiet fire behind them. "You know why I called you," he wheezed. "Always saved the quiet ones, for special occasions. And this," he coughed, chest spasming, "this is my last one." Every word sounded like it cost him a little more life. "Yes, sir," Cleo said softly, lowering her eyes. "I know exactly why you called me." She stood at the side of the bed, close enough to smell the rot in his breath, the sickness sweating out of his pores. His hand twitched toward a silver bell resting beside him, a small, polished thing he had used to summon people like they were dogs. Then Cleo did something he didn't expect. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The Baron's gaze sharpened. Confusion flickered. "What's that?" he croaked. "Something I found in your study 3 months ago," Cleo said. Her voice was still quiet, but the edge beneath it had hardened into steel. I was cleaning. You left a drawer open. She slowly unfolded the paper, smoothing it out over the blanket that covered his failing body. The wax seal, the signature, the date exactly as they had been when she first discovered them. Do you remember this? She asked. He squinted. The name at the top of the document swam into focus. Lily. His jaw clenched. You had a fever, Cleo continued. You were dying. Again. She nursed you through it. You promised her freedom if she saved your life. You signed this paper. Then when you got better, she looked him in the eye. You put it in a drawer, and you left her in chains. The Baron's face drained from waxy yellow to ashy gray. His fingers twitched against the sheet. Those papers mean nothing, he managed, though his voice wavered. She stayed. She worked. She was mine. She was free, Cleo said. By law. Which means when I was born, I was free too. Every day I've spent here as your property, every order, every beating, every threat, that wasn't just sin. It was a crime. His hand shot toward the bell, but Cleo calmly slid it out of reach, her movements smooth, unhurried. Don't worry, she said. I'm not here to hurt you. I don't need to. He glared at her, breathing harder now, lungs hitching. You think you can do anything with some old paper? He rasped. No clerk filed it. No witnesses. No one'll listen to a little field rat. Cleo reached into her dress again and pulled out another folded bundle. Then another, and another. Letters. Copies of ledgers. Sealed statements from the courthouse. She spread them across his blanket like a card dealer laying out a winning hand. See? That's the thing, she said gently. You're right about one part. Papers alone don't matter much. Not without someone to use them. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so even the sleeping nurse wouldn't hear. I've been meeting with a man you might know by reputation, she whispered. Nathaniel Dawson, the abolitionist lawyer from Boston. The Baron froze. His eyes widened. He's very interested in Thornhill Plantation, Cleo went on, especially when I showed him the copies of your account books. You really should have locked those drawers, sir. Mortgaging the same land 3 times to different banks. Selling people you didn't own. Hiding freedom papers. Kidnapping free families. And forging bills of sale. His breathing quickened. Coming in short, panicked bursts now. You're lying, he spat. Or tried to. It came out thin. Weak. You think so? Cleo asked softly. She picked up one of the documents and held it up. This is a letter from your brother in Virginia. The one where he warns you that the authorities are investigating illegal slave trading. The one where you tell him not to worry because you have friends in the courthouse. Mr. Dawson liked this one a lot. The Baron grasped at the sheets like he was trying to hold onto the bed, the room, the world. My sons. They'll kill you, he wheezed. The overseers, the neighbors. You think the law's on your side? The law is ours. Cleo straightened, her gaze cool. Is it? She asked. She walked to the window and lifted the curtain. Outside, in the distance, orange light flickered against the darkening sky. That glow you see, she said. That's the old storage building next to the overseer's house. Empty. I made sure. But the fire looks bad enough to keep Harlow and his friends busy for a while. His eyes followed the light, horror dawning. He tried to push himself up, but his body had nothing left to give. And downstairs, Cleo added, your sons are already talking to Mr. Dawson. Loudly. They don't like what they're hearing, especially about the debts, and the lawsuits, and the part where the estate might be forced to pay restitution. The Baron's lips trembled. You can't. Cleo turned back to the door and opened it. In the hallway, Mama Rose stood waiting. Beside her, Minerva. Behind them, a cluster of faces from the quarters. Men, women, elders. People the Baron had ordered, beaten, bought, and sold. People he had never once looked at as anything but numbers. They stepped into the room, one by one, forming a circle around the bed. For years, you did everything in secret, Cleo said. Tonight, you don't get secrets. You get witnesses. Mama Rose stepped closer, a folded letter in her hand. Cleo found this too, she said, voice calm, steady. From your brother. You admitted to kidnapping free black families and selling them south. You put it in writing. The Baron stared up at them, chest heaving, sweat soaking his collar. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by the people he'd stepped on, only now he was the one who couldn't move. Mr. Dawson has filed 17 lawsuits already, Cleo said. By the end of the week, there'll be 50. Every person you claim to own, every family you broke, every illegal sale. The courts will pick through your crimes for years. She leaned down, so her face filled his fading vision. You wanted me here tonight for your pleasure, she said quietly. Your power, your last act of domination. But this? She gestured to the papers, the circle of eyes around him. This is my revenge. Not your body, your legacy. From her satchel, she pulled one last document. This, she said, is the contract where you agreed to sell me to a man in Alabama next month. The one who works people to death in 5 years, if they're lucky. She held it where he could see his own signature at the bottom. Then, slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. That's not going to happen, she said. None of your plans are going to happen. You're dying, and your empire is dying with you. There's nothing you can do but lie here and feel it crumble. The Baron's eyes filled with tears, hot, helpless, and too late. His chest convulsed, breaths turning into a desperate rattle. He looked from Cleo to Mama Rose to the others, seeing not property, but witnesses. Not silence, but judgment. Why? He choked. Why tell me? Why not just let me go? Not knowing, Cleo's gaze hardened. Because my mother didn't get peace, she said. Because you let her die thinking she'd failed to secure my freedom. Because everyone in this room lived in terror while you slept easy. You don't get an easy death. She gathered the papers back into her satchel, each page sliding into place with the soft finality of a closing coffin. The documents are filed, she said. The lawsuits are moving. Your sons are screaming downstairs right now. You can't stop what's coming. Nurse Pritchard stirred, blinking awake, confused by the crowd and the tension in the air. Mama Rose touched Cleo's arm. We should go, she murmured. Let him die with his thoughts. Cleo looked at the man in the bed. The Baron's eyes were wild now, trapped between rage and terror, forced to watch as the world he thought he owned slipped away. No, she said softly. We'll let him die with the truth. She turned and walked out, the others following. The door closed behind them with a quiet click that sounded, in that hallway, louder than any gunshot. Downstairs, raised voices and breaking glass echoed through the house. Upstairs, in his grand, towering bed, Baron Thornhill faced something he had never faced before. Consequences. And Cleo, the girl he thought was a helpless, voiceless piece of property, had just put the first nail in the coffin of his entire name. If you think that was the end of her revenge, you're wrong. What she did after his death didn't just bring down one man, it threatened an entire system built on people like him. Baron Thornhill died just before dawn. His body finally gave up after a night of gasping, clawing at sheets, reaching for papers that weren't there. Nurse Pritchard claimed his last words were nothing but choked whispers, half-formed sounds, panicked groans. According to her, he kept trying to speak, but the words died on his tongue the same way his empire was dying in the courts. His sons refused to come to his bedside. They were too busy screaming at the lawyer in the parlor downstairs. By sunrise, Thornhill Plantation was silent in a way it had never been before. Not calm silence of confusion, of people holding their breath. Clouds of early morning mist clung low over the fields. For the first time in years, the land itself seemed unsure of its place, as if wondering whether to continue serving a dead master or wait for someone else to claim it. Cleo stood in the kitchen house, surrounded by dozens of people who had never heard the word freedom applied to them without threat or sarcasm. They weren't celebrating. Not yet. Hope can be a dangerous emotion among people who've had it ripped out of their hands too many times. Marcus, the tall, quiet stablemaster, leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight. You telling us this is legal? He asked, suspicion shadowing his eyes. They ain't gonna just sell us off before any judge hears a word. Mama Rose spoke before Cleo could answer. The documents are filed. The court's notified. The lawyer's here right now. Fighting. And the Thornhill sons? Dessa asked, her voice small but sharp. They gonna let this happen? Minerva answered from the doorway, breathless. They're locked in the study with those lawyers. Frederick threw a bottle when Dawson said they might owe restitution money. Thomas looks like he's about to faint. Cleo didn't smile. She didn't feel triumph yet. Not until the law signed itself onto the truth she had dragged out of the shadows. We wait for the courts, she told them. But the Thornhills can't sell anybody, can't move us, can't hurt us without making things worse for themselves. Why would they care about what's worse for them? Marcus asked. Cleo turned to him. Because now, someone with power is watching. And right on cue, a carriage appeared on the dirt road leading to the big house, wheels kicking up red dust as it came to a stop. A thin man stepped down, wire-rimmed glasses glinting in the sun, ink-stained fingers adjusting his coat. Nathaniel Dawson, Boston abolitionist lawyer. The man who had been sending letters to courts all week. He crossed the yard with purpose, but when he reached the kitchen door, he paused, removed his hat, and bowed slightly. Good morning, Miss Cleo. Not girl, not slave, not property. Miss Cleo. The room went still. People stared, some confused, others wide-eyed. A few looked away, afraid to show their reaction. Dawson cleared his throat. Businesslike but respectful. We need to move quickly. The Thornhill brothers are scrambling. They're already trying to liquidate assets before the courts freeze them. I've filed several injunctions to stop them. But we need documentation of every person here. Names, years served, purchase records if you were purchased, and especially any known birth certificates or lost freedom papers. Cleo nodded and lifted 3 ledgers from a hidden space under the floorboards. She set them on the table with a quiet thud. I've been keeping records. Dawson blinked, surprised. He opened the ledgers, flipping through carefully. Neat handwriting, names, dates, notes on families separated and illegally resold. Even cross-references with banknotes Cleo had memorized and copied from the Baron's private papers. This is extraordinary, he murmured. Detailed, cross-checked, and dated. Do you know what this means? It means we have proof, Cleo said flatly. Proof they can't burn, hide, or pretend didn't exist. Dawson looked up slowly. This will help dozens of cases. Possibly hundreds in this region. 53 families here, Cleo corrected. And others sold. All deserve their truth. Dawson closed the ledger with quiet awe. We start immediately. By noon, the tobacco barn had turned into a courtroom of sorts. Dawson, along with 2 associates, sat at a makeshift desk of crates, taking statements, writing depositions, copying documents. One by one, people stepped forward to speak their lives into the record. Jeremiah the blacksmith described his father's freedom papers that the Baron ripped up 2 decades ago. Dessa produced a scrap of her grandmother's letter, proving free birth in North Carolina. Marcus, who had secretly taught himself to read by studying newspapers, presented abolitionist articles he'd saved and hidden, proving he knew of legal precedents long before Dawson arrived. This plantation, Dawson muttered between testimonies, is sitting on a legal powder keg. Not just illegal enslavement, fraud, kidnapping, tax crimes, financial deception. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a criminal enterprise masked as a plantation. His words traveled through the barn, out into the yard, into every cabin. For the first time, people realized they weren't just victims, they were evidence. By late afternoon, the Thornhill brothers stumbled into the barn, eyes wild. Their rumpled coats hung crooked, hair disheveled, as if they had aged years in a morning. Frederick banged his fist on the table. "You're destroying our family," he shouted at Dawson. "Everything our father built, everything our name stands for." Dawson didn't flinch. "Everything your father built was based on forged documents, illegal sales, and kidnapping. The evidence is overwhelming." You have two choices: fight the lawsuits in court and face criminal charges, or cooperate with restitution and salvage what remains of your name. There is no money for restitution, Thomas cried. His voice cracked on the last word. You think we can pay these people? Our father mortgaged everything. The plantation is drowning in debt. Then it will be sold, Dawson said evenly. The proceeds will be distributed among those your family wronged. The law demands it. Cleo stepped forward, voice calm and steady. The same question you're asking. Where do we go now? That's what we've had to ask ourselves every day of our lives. Frederick's hand shot to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of a polished pistol. The barn tensed instantly, but Dawson's associate, a broad-shouldered man named Thompson, stepped between them without hesitation. I wouldn't do that, Mr. Thornhill, Thompson warned. There are dozens of witnesses here. Assaulting a free woman is a serious crime in Georgia, Frederick snapped. She's not free. She was born here. She's property. Dawson lifted a document from the table and held it up. Actually, she's not. Miss Cleo was born to a free woman. Her mother's freedom papers were signed by your father. That makes Miss Cleo's enslavement illegal from birth. Every moment she spent here was a criminal act. Silence thundered through the barn. The brothers stared at Cleo, their faces twisting, not in confusion, not even in disbelief, but in hatred. The kind of hatred born from being powerless for the first time in their lives. They backed away slowly and left the barn without another word. The room didn't breathe again until they disappeared from view. That was dangerous, Mama Rose muttered. Cleo didn't disagree. Men like the Thornhill brothers didn't forget humiliation. They let it ferment into violence. But the real danger wasn't the brothers. It was the men still loyal to the Baron's old order. 3 overseers remained on the plantation. All of them had lost their authority overnight. All of them had built their pride on power they no longer had. 2 lurked around the edges of the property, whispering and drinking. The third, Harlow, walked around like something had been ripped out of his chest. Late, one cold November morning, Cleo was in the study, organizing more copies for Dawson when the door slammed open. Harlow staggered in, drunk, shotgun in his hands. You, he slurred, pointing the barrel at her. All your fancy papers, your know-it-all attitude. You think you're somebody now. Cleo stood slowly. Her pulse pounded, but her expression remained steady. She had learned long ago that fear made violent men feel powerful. The Baron treated us good, Harlow snarled, stepping forward. Treated me like family. Gave me a home. Gave me respect. You killed him with your lies. Cleo studied him, seeing not rage but desperation. A man whose entire identity collapsed the moment his power was questioned. He used you, Cleo said. Used you to do his dirty work. Paid you just enough to stay drunk. You were never family. You were disposable. Shut your mouth, Harlow screamed, raising the shotgun. You don't get to talk to me. You're nothing. You're property. I was never property, Cleo said quietly. By law, and when the courts finish with the Thornhills, they'll look at the overseers next. Kidnapping free people is a capital crime. Harlow's face twisted. He whispered, I could end all of this. Right now. Kill you. Your papers die with you. Cleo didn't move. Her voice became almost gentle. If you kill me, you'll prove everything I've said. You'll create a martyr for the abolitionist cause. And Mr. Dawson, he'll make sure my death destroys every plantation tied to Thornhill's crimes. You won't stop this. You'll make it bigger. The gun wavered. Through the window, Cleo saw Marcus and 2 others sprinting toward the study. Harlow's finger twitched on the trigger. Then the door exploded open. Marcus tackled Harlow from behind. The gun fired into the ceiling, showering plaster across the floor. The room filled with smoke and burnt gunpowder. Thompson and the administrator, Mr. Phillips, rushed in seconds later. Harlow and the other overseers were dragged outside, wrists bound, shouting curses. The sheriff arrived, pale and rattled, and took them away in chains. Mr. Phillips pulled Cleo aside. His voice was low and urgent. This isn't over. Your work here is becoming known outside this plantation. There are men, wealthy men, who don't want you setting a legal precedent. They'll fight this. They'll fight you. Cleo nodded. They already are. Philip studied her a long moment. Then, quietly, be careful. You're not just a witness anymore. You're becoming a symbol. And symbols are targets. That night, Mama Rose found Cleo sitting alone by the kitchen hearth, staring into the flames. The near-death moment hadn't shaken her physically, but it rattled her somewhere deeper, where resolve lived next to fear. You could go north, Mama Rose said, sitting beside her. Mr. Dawson said he could take you to Boston, get you schooling, safety. You could become a lawyer, fight for people from somewhere they can't hurt you. Cleo shook her head. And leave everyone here to face this alone? Leave the children? The elders? Leave the families still waiting for the courts to decide their fate? You've already done more than enough, Mama Rose whispered. Cleo turned to her, eyes unwavering. Not enough. Not until every person here has legal freedom. Not until the Thornhill estate pays restitution. Not until we have land, resources, and a future. I didn't start this to walk away halfway. Mama Rose nodded slowly. Then promise me something. Don't let anger blind you. Don't let pride make you reckless. Building a new life is harder than tearing down the old one. Cleo stared into the fire. The embers glowed red, like a warning and a promise. This isn't revenge anymore, Mama, she said softly. It's justice. And justice takes time. She didn't know then just how long, or how powerful the enemies outside Thornhill would become. But 6 months later, the courts had made their decisions, and the verdict would change everything. Spring came early that year. Thornhill Plantation, once a place where even the wind seemed to carry chains, now bloomed with white dogwood blossoms that floated through the air like tiny scraps of hope. Warm winds pushed winter away, and with it, the ghost of the Baron's rule began to loosen its grip on the land. 6 months had passed since he died choking on truth, and in that time, Thornhill didn't collapse as the elite expected. It transformed. But transformation is slow, and sometimes painful. During those months, the plantation became something no one, neither enslaved nor free, had ever seen before. A community living in limbo. Not slaves, not fully citizens, something in between. They worked the fields not for a master, but to preserve what the courts might soon give them. They harvested crops so they wouldn't starve. They tended livestock so the estate wouldn't be seized by the banks before the judge signed his ruling. They did the labor they had always done. But this time they did it for themselves. The Thornhill brothers, unable to control anything, had fled to Charleston, leaving behind unpaid bills, furious creditors, and a plantation they could no longer govern. In their absence, the federal court appointed administrators outsiders with no knowledge of cotton or bondage. They did one wise thing. They asked Cleo to oversee daily operations. People here trust you, they told her. And you seem to understand everything. She didn't explain that she understood because she had been reading the Baron's private papers for 11 years. She simply nodded and began doing what she'd been preparing to do her entire life. Lead. But leading meant speaking to people who had never been allowed to hear truth spoken plainly. Every day she walked across the plantation, talking to elders, to field hands, to mothers, to boys barely old enough to swing a hoe. She explained the lawsuits as if she were teaching a class. She showed them how money would be placed into a trust, how no enslaved person could legally be moved from the property without court approval, how not a single person could be sold. She translated Dawson's legal language into the language of survival. Think of the courts like a fence, she told them one night as families gathered in the yard. Not a fence to keep us in, a fence to keep them out. For now, we stay inside that fence, and we build. Some people worried, because they had spent their whole lives being told not to believe in anything they couldn't see. So, Cleo showed them numbers, showed them copies of bank invoices, receipts, letters, and contracts. She used the Baron's own handwriting to prove their worth. It wasn't easy. Trust doesn't come naturally to people who've been betrayed for generations. But slowly, steadily, they began to stand taller when they walked. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened, like a knot finally beginning to unravel. Then one bright April morning, the tobacco barn, the same one where people once cured leaves under the watch of overseers, filled with the community again. This time, they weren't here to work. They were here to hear their future. Nathaniel Dawson was already waiting inside, a stack of documents beside him, fatigue etched into his face, but something brighter to satisfaction. He had fought long hours in unfamiliar courts, against wealthy men who threatened him, bribed clerks, and nearly bought judges. He had outrun the good old boy networks that protected slave traders with a handshake and a quiet donation. He had stared down men who'd never had to fear the law before, and he had won. He greeted Cleo with a nod. Then he lifted the documents high enough for everyone to see. "I have rulings," he announced. A breath moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Babies hushed. Elders straightened. Men and women who had picked cotton with numb fingers now felt electricity running through their veins. "The federal court has issued decisions on the first wave of cases," Dawson said, "and these rulings set precedents for every remaining case." He paused just long enough to let the weight of his words sink in. "The first ruling is this: any person enslaved based on forged documents, hidden freedom papers, or illegal sales is hereby declared free under federal law." A shout rippled through the crowd. Hands flew to mouths. People grabbed one another. Some cried out, not in fear, but in disbelief, like someone hearing a language they'd always known but had never been allowed to speak. "That means," Dawson continued, 41 people on this plantation are free by law, effective immediately, including Miss Cleo, whose case helped make this ruling possible." Cleo felt her breath catch in her chest. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. Mama Rose threw her arms around her, shaking with joy. Tears rolled down the old woman's cheeks, wetting the scarf tied around her hair. "You did it, girl," Mama Rose whispered. "You did it." But Dawson wasn't finished. The second ruling concerns restitution. The court declares the Thornhill estate responsible for financial compensation to every individual victimized by illegal enslavement. He held up another document. "The plantation and all of its assets will be sold. The proceeds will be distributed among the families who were held unlawfully." Gasps, cries. Someone fainted. Babies were passed into arms as women clutched hands and men bowed their heads. For the first time in their lives, money, real money, would belong to them. Money that could buy land, tools, safety. Cleo felt her knees weaken, but she stayed standing. Dawson raised the third document, thicker, heavier. "The court has also recognized that simply awarding individual money will not secure the future of this community. So they are creating something new, something unprecedented." He let the silence tighten. "A cooperative land trust." People stared, confused. Land was something that had always belonged to others, something that treated them like tools, something that took their sweat and gave nothing back. Land-owning black hands, the idea was too big to touch. "The plantation," Dawson explained, "will be divided among the people who worked it. Each family will receive title to 5 acres of land, plus shared ownership of resources like the mill, the blacksmith shop, and the water rights. You won't just be free." He smiled. A tired, genuine smile. "You will be landowners." The barn exploded not in chaos, but in celebration. People cried openly, fell into each other's arms, lifted children into the air. Elders wept into their palms, whispering prayers of thanksgiving and disbelief. Someone shouted Cleo's name. Others began chanting, not out of worship, but pride. It took Dawson several minutes to restore calm, and then he said one more thing, one final ruling that would change the direction of Cleo's entire life. "The court recognizes the need for leadership during this transition. They asked me to recommend an administrator for the land trust, someone who understands both the legal situation and the community's needs." He turned, looked directly at Cleo. "So I recommended Miss Cleo." She froze. "The court has agreed," Dawson continued. "If you accept, you will oversee land distribution, manage shared resources, and represent the community in legal matters for 5 years. It will be paid work, and it comes with federal authority. The barn went silent again, this time in shock. Cleo felt every eye turn to her. She was no longer the girl born into illegal bondage, no longer the child taught to read in secret. She had become the architect of their future. So she spoke, voice steady as a plow cutting earth. "I accept." The barn erupted again, and the celebration spilled into the yard, into the quarters, into every cabin and field. Music rose, tambourines shook, feet stomped the dirt like they were planting joy. For the first time in generations, people made plans not to survive the next season, but to build the next life. Later that night, Cleo slipped away from the laughter and walked to the steps of the big house. Mama Rose found her there, sitting quietly under the moonlight, looking out at a plantation that had never belonged to them but soon would. "You did a mighty thing today," Mama Rose said as she lowered herself beside Cleo. "The courts did it," Cleo replied. "Courts don't file lawsuits," Mama Rose countered. "People do. People with courage and stubbornness. People like you." Cleo looked at the broad field stretching into the darkness. "We have land now, but we have to learn how to own it, how to build something that lasts, how to work together." Mama Rose chuckled. "Child, we've been working together our whole lives. Only difference now is the fruit of that work lands in our hands instead of theirs." Cleo didn't answer. She watched the glow of the bonfires, the silhouettes of people dancing in the yard. She thought of her mother, Lily, who died thinking she'd failed to secure her child's freedom. She thought of the Baron, dying with the knowledge that everything he built was turning to dust beneath the feet of those he once claimed to own. She thought of Harlow in chains, the Thornhill brothers hiding in Charleston, the other plantations watching in fear as the law shifted. She thought of the future. "I used to think revenge was the point," Cleo murmured. Mama Rose leaned against her, warm and steady. "What changed your mind?" Cleo took a long breath and finally said the truth she had only just realized. "Revenge ends with one person broken. Justice starts with a whole people rising." Mama Rose nodded. "Then let's rise." Cleo stood, brushed the dust from her dress, and looked at the big house one last time. It would soon be torn down, its beams used to build homes for families, its bricks repurposed for schools, workshops, maybe even a courthouse. The mansion, once a symbol of torment, would become the foundation of something better. The land that had been soaked in tears would yield crops for freedom. The fields that swallowed whole generations would feed children with last names and legal futures. Cleo walked down the steps, toward the celebration, toward the people, toward tomorrow. The past could not be undone, but the future could be written. And for the first time, the ink was in the hands of those who had once been denied their names. Thornhill was no longer a plantation. It was a beginning.